markets in general, and also the impact on innovation itself and technology. I think we're going to drift a little bit around on this. So I'd like to introduce the panel first. Demetra Kalagiru is the chairwoman of Cyprus SEC. Did I get that close? Thank you. I'm trying here. Some of these names are challenging. Michael Lipstick is security litigation, government, and internal investigations. He's now in private practice. He's a former senior official at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. So we're going to get a chance to hear what the SEC, at least someone from the SEC formally, has on some of these regulatory issues. Jeffrey, we've already seen this morning. Jeffrey M. Benham, he's the FinTech advisor, and formerly from the U.S. Commodity Futures and Trading Commission, CFTC. And Keith, over there, who we haven't seen here today, an independent director and advisor. And myself, Richard Castle, and I'll be moderating this panel. So I guess I'm going to start with the regulation environment and concerning ICOs, because that's where I feel comfortable starting this conversation. And one of the, I don't know if any of you are aware of it, but currently there's a lot of money being raised in ICOs. It's very hot right now. It's a very interesting space. Over $1 billion has been raised since May of this year. And but there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty with the regulatory environment and where it's possible and where it's not. So right now, ICOs are domiciling in Switzerland, they're domiciling in Singapore, Gibraltar, Luxembourg, Liechtenstein a little bit, the usual suspects, Malta. But how are the other environments looking at it? So in the United States in particular, everybody looks to see what's happening in America as kind of benchmark for what's going to happen in the rest of the world. And right now, during ICOs, they're blocking American investors. So that's kind of an indication of how the current climate is. If America isn't making a decision on this, then we better just keep them away. And some are going as far as even IP blocking, completely putting up they can tunnel their way through with VPN and stuff, but yeah, they IP block American IP addresses at this point. So what is the cause and effect of that? Is that at the price of innovation, in fact, that Americans aren't part of this ongoing, new, emerging, let's call it digital asset revolution or tokenomics, or whatever we want to call it, where we're raising and creating new capital for innovation? Is this the cost of regulatory uncertainty? And I guess I would start with Michael a little bit about this, because he's been at the SEC and been in some of these internal discussions about the position of the SEC. And I'm really going to load this on you. I'm sorry, Mike, but I've got to start somewhere.
Well, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Paulo, and the other sponsors for having me here. I was at the SEC for 10 years, the last 4 of which I was working for the chair of the agency in a policy advisory role. And now I've left the agency, so I don't need to give John's disclaimer. These are my own. I can say how I really feel. And I was part of the discussions at the SEC about what to do with first Bitcoin and then digital currencies, as well as more broadly peer-to-peer DLTs and the rest of the fintech revolution. Now, if the question is, why doesn't the SEC come out and say, these are securities, these aren't securities, we're going to regulate them, we're not going to regulate them? Anyone who's holding their breath for that announcement is going to start turning blue. The U.S. regulators, and I think the SEC falls in this, I'm sure Jeff would agree, are by their nature slow-moving and conservative with a small c. They are in, and I think this is appropriate for now, they are in look, listen, and learn mode. So they are studying this, and they're trying to get up to speed on it. But for some question like, is an ICO, how would we get that to happen in the United States without taking on the risk that the SEC could deem it a security in some way or another, and then it becomes an unregistered security, and you find yourself on the wrong end of an SEC enforcement action? Those are not the type of pronouncements that the Commission is very well suited to make.
Okay. Maybe the CFTC's perspective, because just a little bit also background is, I don't think it's really clear whether this is a security, a currency, or a commodity. And if it is a commodity, which most people seem to be leaning towards, then it really directly falls under the CFTC. So, we'll hear a little bit more on that.
Yeah, sure. It's and I also don't, I'm the ex-CFTC official, also spend time looking at some of these issues. In fact, on John's disclaimer, he didn't even say his views weren't those of the Fed. His affiliation to the FSB, whose views he did not represent. So it's like a doubly attenuated disclaimer that some of these. So, a couple of observations in this area. I mean, I think there is a lot of attention being paid to what are the regulators going to do. Why don't they do something about it? I think that some folks are surprised that the U.S. regulators haven't kind of jumped in more strongly. I think part of that has to do. There are a couple of factors, and this is one of the reasons I think people hate lawyers is because they will often say, well, it depends. But in the case of some of the factors that affect, are these things securities, which of course Mike would be more of an expert in, or are they commodities, or are they somehow commodity derivatives? These can often be very kind of facts and circumstances dependent. In the case of the SEC, there's a very well established test referred to as the Howey test with specific factors where you look at the underpinning realities to these ICOs are not exactly one size fits all. So in fact, it would be very difficult for the regulator, either regulator, to just sort of make a blanket statement about these. And as you agree with Michael, you do have sort of a small C conservative lot on these kinds of things. Another factor is that the regulator, you can really only regulate the things that fall under the statute and the authorization of your agency. Kind of the term for that is jurisdiction, kind of Latin term, the right to speak. And so, if the CFTC or any U.S. agency were to go to start sort of making pronouncements or impose rules or oversight over things that aren't the things that the Congress and our legal system has given it the right to say things about, again, we get slapped down very quickly by Congress, by the courts. So it can't really do that. You can only kind of speak to the things that actually fall under you, or maybe there's kind of an area that's things that are very close. You can do clarifications. And often I've been struck actually by kind of an evolution in the thinking of, the way some of the thinking in the sort of crypto community around some of these ICOs. Like in the beginning, I think it was very, we don't want regulation. Cryptocurrency is better than fiat currency. I think particularly since your former colleagues turned down the SolidX and Winklevoss Bitcoin ETF things, some folks in the crypto community said, well, maybe there would be advantages to having a regulator oversee these types of things, but it's not the case that if the CFTC sees some market that would benefit from its oversight because it's good at overseeing markets, you can just go in and say, okay, fine, we're going to oversee these things now. Again, that comes down to your jurisdiction. I guess the last point I would make on this is, kind of what is a commodity and how does the definition of commodity tie into this. And in fact, there were, technically the CFTC oversees the commodity derivatives markets, which historically were futures and options, and swaps were added to that after the financial crisis. And mostly those tend to be products that are traded by kind of more kind of sophisticated, not so much retail markets, but the CFTC may have jurisdiction over retail commodity transactions, particularly if there are two elements to the fact pattern. One is if margin or leverage is involved, so if you pay $1,000 for $10 worth of Bitcoin, you've got kind of some financing or leverage. Secondly, if the people who sold it to you don't really deliver it to you, but they're sort of holding on to it, and you've sort of got a notation, but it hasn't really, full title ownership and some sort of possession of the digital asset that's been transferred to you, that may fall into a line of cases that are related to kind of a retail commodity transaction. The tokens are one step removed because they're not the actual currency, and they involve kind of future use of things. So I think there's a lot of factors in terms of why there hasn't been kind of a blanket pronouncement. But I agree with Michael that anybody who thinks the regulators aren't paying attention, I think would be mistaken.
Maybe I can ask Dimitri a question about the current status in Cyprus and the SEC there, and the position that you're kind of taking. I mean, you have Malta. I know Malta is very bullish on crypto, or Gibraltar, the usual. He's just sort of following Switzerland into this new emerging area, and not just those countries, but also Madagascar and several other emerging economies are really starting to look at how they can, Kazakhstan, how they can kind of take advantage of with having a loose regulatory environment to allow these kind of fundraising, new financial instruments to take place. So, what's your thinking on this? And I mean, I know also it must be difficult to keep up with that whole industry because it's moving so quickly as well.
I will give you some insight from the European regulators rather than from the US regulators, and I'm sure that we are more conservative, even more conservative than the US, I think, in the issues of fintech, and maybe we are more slower than the American regulators. I think that in Cyprus just to say that in Cyprus we have a lot of financial entities that technology companies, and they are regulated by the Cyprus Securities and Exchange Commission. They are high-tech companies giving their products and services to their technology cross-border and worldwide. So we are talking about a lot of transactions done cross-border using the payment institutes that were mentioned before by before. So you understand that it's a lot of work to supervise, and these companies now are seeking for more fintech products, like the robo-advice. That's something that already there is a paper there by the three ESAs, which is the EBA, the ESMA, which is our regulator, the securities regulator, and IOBA, which is the insurance regulator. And there they are seeing the risks and the opportunities of having a robo-advice now. And for example, an investor can go to the website and then can do all electronically the KYC, the appropriateness test, the suitability test, and then having an advice by a robot, by an algorithm, and according to the needs of the customer and his suitability about the product, and there is another algorithm showing the strategy and the investment services to follow. So you understand we are moving forward, and we are a bit behind as regulators to accommodate such new technologies. The cryptocurrency, as you mentioned before, actually in Cyprus there was an exchange bureau that exchanged the bitcoins into the local currency, for example. And there was a debate again at that time, 2014 I think, whether these bitcoins were a currency already, it was a commodity or something else. EBA came and said, because this is unclear whether it is a currency or it's still under examination, it says to the national competent authorities not to actually encourage our supervised entities to use such cryptocurrencies. So you understand there is, it's not really, we don't accommodate easily, to say that, the new technology, if there are risks entailed. And don't forget that the Securities Commission is about, it's more about protection of the investors. If there is risks and more than the opportunities, then we have to examine it very well and understand the regulations, how we regulate better in order to protect the investors. So in this case, we shut down the Bureau Exchange, and actually we don't accept exchange of bitcoins to the local currency, even though we have one university in Cyprus accepting applications through a bitcoin.
Nicosia, right? It's actually the only place you can get your master's in digital currency.
Yes, it's through another Bureau Exchange in another jurisdiction that makes the transactions. In So what are the risks is because there is anonymity, is the risk of AML risks, and consumer risks. Because if the Bureau exchange cannot, at the end of the day, find money to exchange the Bitcoin, what will happen if there is no regulation there?
Thanks, Mike. Well, that kind of leads me into the next question. I think moving over to Keith and get his take a little bit on this. I know recently, I heard through the grapevine that France is actually very, very much considering to allow its open sale to go on in French jurisdiction, which is be the first European country to move in that direction, other than the usual suspects which I mentioned earlier. Let's talk about the UK and what's the position over here? We've got Brexit coming up, and we've got a lot of turmoil in the city, and this is the last thing on the list of a lot of things to think about, but maybe you can elucidate and enlighten us a little bit on that.
Probably the answer is yes to everything you just said, but so okay, let's take that one stage at a time. Moving just a little bit broader than the token sales, I think let's recognise where the regulators are, where the industry is, what innovation is occurring, and what that truly means for the adoption of fintech. Because I think as John said earlier on, fintech's not brand new, right? So I've been in the market for about 40 years. I used to run trading rooms. I can tell you I procured financial technology a long, long time ago. So things have moved on, and the reality of the maturity of a lot of these approaches is actually because of the maturity of the technology industry. So if you think of the real ability through true enterprise-wide, virtualized, distributed computing, cloud-based, however you want to call that, this is really the undercurrent of the ability of fintech firms to start up very quickly, for everyone to scale, for everybody to do something very, very different. You put that in the context of the financial industry had a significant change mostly because of post-2008 regulatory changing, probably more to do with capital requirements than anything else. You also put that at the same time as a paradigm shift in the technology industry based on how technology is bought and procured. This is really the bubbling up of a lot of innovation. So the key question is, how do you look and manage that? So it's very simple on the one hand is because if you can't see anything, you can't really understand it. We've been through that cycle, I'm afraid, in 2007 and 2018, though we saw stuff, we didn't really deal with it. So there's a knowledge issue, and therefore there's another piece that says, well, how do you get innovation adopted when in fact, in this particular industry, and hence you're seeing a lot of things which arguably are slightly outside the system, you have a lot of technology debt, or legacy systems, or however you want to call that. So we've got this sort of really difficult position that the countries themselves and the regulators, and indeed the firms themselves, the traditional financial firms, and indeed the new firms, are all struggling with the same thing, which is how do I make progress and how do I create value? So the UK position in fintech's been very clear. For about 3 to 4 years, I was fortunate enough to be on an expert panel. We wrote a paper on behalf of the government, for the UK Government Office of Science, which was published 2 years ago, called The Future of Fintech. From that paper, we recommended a whole bunch of things. One was the setup of the RegTech sandbox under the FCA. The Bank of England here has also got an accelerator. This has been replicated around the world, and in fact, I've just helped publish a paper on behalf of Innovate Finance when we did a year-long study in the use of industry sandboxes, which is all about promoting and accelerating innovation and the adoption of these new technologies. So in terms of the UK and Brexit, I think there's a couple of pieces with that. Naturally, the city is going to be under attack, but the city historically has some very strong anchors in things like law and all sorts of other stuff which doesn't go away very easily. From a fintech point of view, everybody told me people were going to up sticks and move to Singapore and or Berlin and or Dublin and or Frankfurt and or Paris. Some will not. It depends where they feel their resources are. A lot of the resources actually from a coding point of view, if you look at it that way around, are somewhat offshore already, perhaps not quite so dependent on a specific city. And then I think you're into unfortunate, really two ends of the same spectrum, which is on the one hand, we're in global markets and we're a complex adaptive system and we need to understand all that, but then you get down to national level. And so very specifically here in the UK, as far as tokens go, there's good old securities law, which is a caveat emptor. The FCA has also been very, very strong on looking at some of these new technologies. Their role is actually consumer safety, first and foremost. And so the degree to which people are trying to be transparent and secure and find the right method to do that, well, that's the advent of RegTech, actually. And we can speak more about that. But I think in terms of tokenization, to me, unfortunately, having been around blogging a number of times, the fact that somebody thinks they're creating money and or value outside of a system that has no checks and balances, and the company that's issuing those tokens is not committing to anything, smells a bit .com-like to me, I'm afraid. So I think money's chasing, frankly, money's chasing yield because we're coming off 10 years of a bull market in interest rates. So I would make that same comment peer-to-peer, but see some different activity in action is my belief, as and when interest rates turn back up, which is already happening.
Okay. If I could basically, I'll just mention, to try and dispel some of the scam rumors about ICOs, because they do have this sort of black coating on them that's understandably come through Bitcoin as well, with its questionable history in some respects. But I also want to emphasize that that a lot of these initial coin offerings, and actually we're getting away from that word now in our community, we're calling them token allocation events. And they're not investors anymore, they're participants. So we're getting away from the verbiage which connects us to IPO for many reasons, including pleasing guys like these guys up here from the SEC. But almost all the ICOs that currently come out today, and I'll use the old words because I don't care, are foundations. They're not commercial companies. They're run under a foundation nonprofit structure, very similar to Ethereum. Secondly, they open source all their software. Now, these are two elements, actually, that venture capitalists would never invest in. They want intellectual property. They want patents. They don't want open source software. They want companies that make profits for their shareholders. They don't want foundations. So, from our perspective, as people in the open source community who've been building stuff for a long time, well, I've been in open source since 2001, 2002. I used to laugh. The only currency in our world was ego. Like, you build things and people use them and it feels good. Because it wasn't about making money, it was about building things together as a community, whether you're working in Linux or WordPress or Joomla or any of these other software stacks. So now we're actually seeing this new vehicle that allows us from this community to actually be rewarded for the work that we're doing. Sometimes people say too much. And some projects are a little questionable, like they're really stretching to get a utility value for their products that they're trying to ship. I also agree with that, but generally the community, that's reflected in the community in how they invest. They usually don't raise much money, but Mike?
Yeah, it's Jeff. So, I think it's very interesting. I think it was your data point earlier today that the VC-backed ICOs or token realization events are raising like 1/4 as successful. The ones that are open source with the foundations are much more successful. So I think the evolution of it is pretty interesting. And when I think about it, not from just a regulation point of view, but from a business point of view, and a couple of observations come to mind. Like first of all, if I'm starting a business, and I kind of bring sort of having seen a lot of folks try to build businesses of the kinds that Keith was talking about earlier. We were trying to build trading businesses, we're trying to build markets, and we're trying to build something called liquidity. We want people to use your product or service. And so a lot of the token offerings they're sort of, people are sort of advanced buyers of your service, and you're trying to get this product in the hands of the people who are likely to use it. So it's really not clear to me. So from that perspective, are people who are doing these token sales, are they really getting their products into the hands of people who are going to use their products with their natural audience, who are going to be the users of it? So, I have, that type of business, and my product is, fashion for teenage girls, and all the people, buying my tokens in pre-sale are hedge funds and, male developers. I may have a great token pre-sale and I've got a lot of money, but have I really gotten my tokens into the hands of people who are going to use my product? And then, then you might ask the question, well, are the people who are raising the token sales, are they really trying to build a business, or is it just so tempting because it does seem to be so sort of fast and easy to do it? And so if you're trying to build liquidity or use of something, whether it's storage or this kind of basic retention token, which I think is absolutely fascinating, are these things really being designed to get these tokens into the hands of people who will use the product, which I think is where you'd like them to go, because then however many months from now, when you actually release the usable product, you want the people who have the tokens to go use it. You don't want them to be sitting somewhere where it's not accessible to your natural market. So
it's interesting that you mentioned the BAT token, basic attention token, because this is a project that's founded by the guy who brought us Mozilla. So fantastic team. The problem was they raised I think 35 million in 3 minutes or whatever it was, crazy time. But they only had 180 investors. That's because the people bought a lot of Ether. It was split between 180 people. So actually, he didn't really achieve, or they didn't really achieve what they wanted to out of that token sale, because they wanted to have an audience. They wanted to have 10,000 people buy, and then they have a sales route to. Then they have a community built. Community is an important part of it. So our prices of our cryptocurrencies are based on network value. So what are they buying for? What are they selling for? And it's one of the most integral parts of the business model.
Sure. I just want to add one other thing that's great to have an insight to that. But I think from another perspective, the capital formation potential of these things is just really eye-opening. I think any regulator, any capitalist around the world has got to be paying attention to that. And the new chairman of the SEC did his first speech last week, and one of the things that he commented on was that they're going to be paying a lot of attention to capital formation. And the thing he really focused in on the speech was how folks of kind of unicorns and startups are they tend to stay in the private market, that the public markets are not so attractive, and sort of the Main Street investor isn't getting access to these things. But I think as a vehicle for capital formation, that this is something truly amazing and powerful. Just the speed with which these things raise money in such a short period of time is remarkable.
If I could just add to that, when I think about it, it's good that the community is thinking of changing the name. When I think about ICOs, an IPO is sort of the end state of a startup. It's its most mature iteration before it becomes a public company. And what that means is it's got proven product, it should have proven revenue, and it obviously has proven financials and governance structures behind it. Whereas, as I understand, the types of companies that are doing ICOs, these are more angel or seed investors. And if you look back, at least getting back to the question of how do you get U.S. investors involved, the venture community in the U.S. is the least regulated investment advisory business. So it's very easy for venture capitalists to raise money for their funds, put those funds into startup companies with a very light touch regulation. So what I would think is that, and Jeff's absolutely right, I think there's a capital formation aspect to this where if the case can be made that this is a lot more like angel and seed investing and more like VC investing, and then also frame up what are going to be the disclosures, to the extent there are disclosures around these companies, and then also proving their safety. And I think I read last week there was an ICO that got hacked and failed. And to say nothing of what happened with the DAO a while ago, but you want there to be some certainty in the investment process for the US regulators to get comfortable that, sure, we can let these happen within one of, maybe they actually fit under one of the existing exceptions, but that the fail rate isn't going to be quite as high.
Is it going to be a reactionary thing, though? Is it just going to take like the first huge mess that pushes the SEC into, perhaps a negative perspective? I mean, one of our problems is we don't have a body to speak with the SEC. We don't have a Bitcoin Foundation, and there's no organization yet. So you're really talking to, you don't even know who you're talking to. I think that's half the problem.
No, that's right. I mean, coming out of, I got all the compliments to Jeff for what he managed to do at the CFTC in the last few months, bringing them along with their lab, CFTC. At the SEC, we were looking around for the last year and a half that I was there. What do we do about fintech? And we tried to start a conversation in last November with a forum where we brought participants and regulators and academics and said, how should the SEC be thinking about this? I think with the changing administration, there hasn't been a lot of thought about that, but you're exactly right. That part of the challenge is to get in front of the SEC. They are very much, as I said at the outset, they're in the listen and learn mode. So you don't necessarily need an industry group, but you do need to get some people in there who can start talking to the right people. And the SEC is making that harder because they don't have a lab and a single point of entry. But talk to the right people. Here's what these things really are. What concerns does that raise? And on an informal basis, that's the kind of guidance that you'd be able to get. But also, as Jeff said, they're very fact specific. So to the extent these transactions take a regular course, it would be good if you could explain that in a way. Here are the 4 steps to an ICO, the typical ICO. Break it down because.
Well, I mentioned earlier that people don't invest money; they invest Ethereum or Bitcoin,
right.
And it's not classified as money. So they're starting off with a commodity. Which is, as another interesting part of the puzzle. Jeff, a little bit more about real-time regulations. I was quite interested in your thinking about that, and built in as compliance, maybe in the smart contract period, but also, how that would figure out later. Because is real-time regulations that in effect maybe putting regulators out of work? Could it be? Will we see be replaced by blockchain and artificial intelligence like many other industries?
It's a great question, and I think that kind of deposit, the concept. Looking around the room, I think most of you were here this morning, but kind of the real-time regulation. The concept was that all sorts of new data will become available to regulators as a result of adoption of the blockchain and as transactions occur, as goods are shipped, all this information will be on the ledger, and that regulators will have these auditor notes and have access to all this information in real time, which will give them much greater ability, much faster than is the case today. Like typically now, most regulators get things end of day, the next day, end of week, end of quarter, in arrears. And so I think that in order to make sense of all that information, the regulators are going to need new tools, new dashboards, new artificial intelligence tools that will let them kind of see patterns and anomalies. And then I suppose the question is, once they have all these tools helping them make sense of it, will some of those things actually be able to, will they start to do the job of regulators, like circuit breakers at an exchange, or and it's really fascinating to see where this will go. Like I think some of you mentioned the RegTech Lab, the work that the FCA is doing, and there's work being done to automate parts of their rule book, to have taxonomy and put that into machine language. Now, once they do that and they make that available, and that I think the direction that it's going, once it's adequately perfected and reliable, is to kind of open source that. Then that means the kind of the regulated community and people who are acting in these kind of markets, the P2P and other markets that the FCA oversees, will be able to actually embed the rule book and these rules in their actions. So whether it's kind of the auto lender that we saw speak earlier today or others, they actually will be able to kind of build in compliance, and then the regulators will need other tools to sort of monitor that compliance, and that can be happening in real time as they're happening. So I think, could we be, going in a direction where those types of things are possible? I think, down the road, I think there will still be, the need for judgment and oversight of that.
I'm just going to make first.
Adding to what you said is that regulated firms, as the more regulations are coming in, like to transparency, to market abuse, to EMIR. I mean, I'm saying a lot of regulations from Europe, and it seems that they have to enhance their compliance and also their risk management and systems and controls in order to do that in technology. So actually, from the regulator's point of view, we'd like to see the technology to come in the investment firms or any other type of regulated entities in order to enhance this type of functions and the compliance, and especially the risk management. On the other hand, I think blockchain has a big interest in Europe and in ESMA. There is a special task innovative study committee that we could participate, and they're looking on the blockchain technology. Don't forget, with all this reporting that is going to take place, already is taking place by EMIR, where all the investment firms have to report into trade repositories all their trades in CFDs. And now with MiFID, I don't know how many fields they have to again report to our competent authorities and to ESMA. Maybe the use of the blockchain could help to enhance the reporting and again bring a number of benefits to the securities commissions. Actually, in Cyprus, we participate in a project now with the UCL that is called the Barak project. They have funding from Europe in order to that aims at studying the changes that blockchain can introduce in the compliance, as I said before, and also probably, if it's possible, I don't know, to develop a system that can have a real-time data from the market in order for the regulator to supervise and be proactive and see in real time all the trades that is done in order to address any inefficiencies or see any transactions that do not be seen when it's coming after the event. So also just to mention that the Cyprus International Institute of Management, again, association has established Cyprus Blockchain Innovation Center, again, to see and examine possible applications of blockchain in the financial sector. So we all try to see how we can accommodate blockchain either in the investment firms, our supervised entities, or as a regulator to accommodate them.
So let me give you a couple of impressions on where I think technology is going to help the regulators, and actually then give you a very specific live example of a project that I'm involved in, which speaks a lot to what Jeff was just talking about. So the reality of the regulatory environment is that it's a data complexity issue, and so we have a situation where the firms who are supposed to report that data find it somewhat difficult, and that's an understatement, I think. And a lot of that's to do with really the silos they built up, the fact that they rely an awful lot on stranded data. This is somewhat improving, but we spent a long time expecting the banks to do something different. I would say that they are serial compliers. In other words, they haven't looked at anything longer than a 1-year project. They've probably got about 100 regulatory projects on the go, and of course, none of that is really very useful if you're trying to repair quickly your entire undertaking your infrastructure. So there's something different going on actually with this. So at the granular level, it is about granular data, it's about exposing that data, it's about reporting it. There's a lot of conflicting regulation. We're starting to get on the top of that, but it really is a two-sided argument. So do regulators have the right technology to see all the data, get all the data, but the firms themselves themselves actually, are they capable? Is it a specific advantage to them, or is it a burden? And a lot of the arguments around cost of compliance, which I have studied, is actually falsely attributed to the regulation itself. Now, there's no doubt that having to deal with complexity real systems and do stuff is expensive, but an awful lot of this is currently being done manually. And so what we're seeing in the RegTech world, there are some very powerful technologies being applied to effectively read and interpret regulation to keep people very current. There's clearly a lot of data-based innovation going on. There's any number of KYC opportunities. I'll speak a little bit more about some higher level stuff where we might start to think about simulating markets and systems of regulation. But very specifically to distributed ledger more than blockchain. So there's a lot of use cases going on. There's a lot of assumptions that many things that are currently law will just go away, which is not true. So this is a